meeting in the fall, and it was announced to me that I was going to do some reflection on leadership, but whoever's responsible, I want to express my gratitude, primarily because you set me about a task, something I maybe should have done a long time ago, but something I thoroughly enjoyed throughout late fall and winter. And in your packet of material is a result of that discipline, and we're going to spend a little time talking about it. Now, I want to begin by acknowledging that these perspectives about leadership and of my involvement in the ACPE since 1967 are not the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. They are, at best and worst, my truth. Whatever else can be said about leadership anywhere by anyone, at least this must be said. A leader's perception is his or her own reality. Our perception, how we understand and process and believe what we experience, is a faculty of creating and choosing a portrayal of ourselves and of the world we've experienced. In short, our perception is the act of putting information together and interpreting that information, that our perception becomes our blueprint for action. That's just the way it is with all of us. So, my perception and yours, my formation, and of necessity, it must be formed out of my peculiar physical abilities, my particular psychosocial development, and my specific relational and cognitive learning. Being informed by the Reformed tradition of the Holy Catholic Christian Church, I believe and operate out of the understanding that my and your perception is also distorted. And my distorted perception is in need of reformation within community through the feedback of others whose perceptions are also distorted, but hopefully not as much as mine is. The only hopeful thing in that whole process is that beyond all of us is Holy Spirit, who leads and guides and reveals and clarifies other and better perceptions. Together we do the best we can with what we've been given and with how we have received the given, and then we seek each other's forgiveness and hopefully become conduits of grace for each other. I also offer all of these reflections on leadership in full agreement with the following quotes. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. And one can change things by the manner in which one looks at them. And we got 3 years of appreciative inquiry to prove that point. Nevertheless, I am responsible for what I perceive and for the positions and actions I take based upon my distorted perceptions of reality, and that's just the way it is with all of us, whether we ever are in any position of leadership of any group or not. And we're all in need of that beloved community of acceptance and correction that reforms and transforms the distorted perceptions of everyone. Now, what I have just said is in no way a disclaimer nor an excuse for the rest of what I'm going to say. Rather, it's just an affirmation of my perception of my reality. You on board with me? Yes. Okay. Now, I'm going to be very serious in what I'm going to say to you, but I want you not to be so serious. And I want to give you a way out. When Betty would think I had embellished something about the family, she would go check it out with my mother. And my mother would say to her, "Lordy mercy, did he say that?" So this morning, at any point when you think I am embellishing something far beyond I ought to, you are free to say, "Lordy mercy." Okay? In your registration packet, there were 3 documents of history. I provided you in section 1 a listing of the persons in leadership who have served in leadership positions in the Southeast region and those who have represented this region at the ACPE Incorporated. There is also a listing of the ACPE executive directors and presidents and regional directors. These were elected to positions in and through which leadership could be exercised. Some led, some followed. Probably some got in the way. And some didn't show up. In section 2, I reflected on the development of the ACPE Incorporated in 3 movements. The seedbed in which the CPE movement sprouted, the founders and pioneers of the CPE movement, and then the developers and organizers of the ACPE Incorporated. I entered the CPE movement in 1964 when the ACPE Incorporated was being envisioned but not yet organized. Therefore, since I'm the oldest one in the crowd and been involved in it longer, except maybe Bill Ball,
No. Goodness mercy, I didn't say that word.
Lord mercy.
I gotta get that.
all of us are numbered among the developers and organizers of that settlement that some other people pioneered. In section 3, you'll find my presidential address delivered in Portland, Maine in the fall of 1983. In reading it recently, I found it a very adequate description of the transition occurring in ACPE in that period of time, and frankly, I was surprised and pleased with how I had anticipated the further development of ACPE. In that address, I raised concern about who we're becoming and what we were envisioning. Those were questions about our identity and our mission, and you have to ask those questions annually, not every decade. I raised questions and cautions about the concentration of power and a lack of continuity in representation in our governance. You all are still raising those questions, and I hope you'll do it for the rest of your days. I suggested that collaboration within COMET needed to emerge from common standards of clinical pastoral care practices. And bless Pat, we've pulled that off with the help of Jap Keith. And that was economically motivated. Let's just be honest about that. If you want to view these writings in chronological order, the next section 4 should contain the 20-year history of the Southeast region that Brian Child gave to the region in 1987. In that period, from 67 to 87, Bryan celebrated the works, the contributions of Obert Kimpson, Tom McDill, Gus Verdery, and Doug Turley. In Section 5, I utilized the various mission statements of the ACPE Incorporated to illustrate the developing and the organizing of what I had hoped would become a society of clinical pastoral educators. Instead, the movement became an association for clinical pastoral education. And there is a world of difference in the outcome of those two propositions. Constitutionally, we identified ourselves as a both-and association, an association of supervisors and alumni. But practically, we are overwhelmingly still a gathering of CPE supervisors or of those who are aspiring to become so certified. We have more clinical members at this meeting than we've ever had at a single meeting since we invited them into membership, and there are only 4 of them here. And that's because we don't serve them. Never have. And it's about time we did. I expounded upon the significance of those prepositions in my presidential address and in an article published in the Journal of Pastoral Care, and I invite you still to think about it. What was our motivation? To invite people to become members simply because they might have been interested in an association of clinical pastoral educators. Well, we wanted their membership fee. We wanted whatever public relations they might could create for us. But we were not prepared to offer them any more continuing education, any more certification, or any place in our governance. One of the arguments we continue to have is what will be the size of the Board of Reps, and will there be people of color or clinical members or seminary reps, or who will be in those positions, not the 2 representatives from the region. I think we're still struggling with a decision we made way back then when we decided to call ourselves the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education. I wish we had time to look carefully at the 4 mission statements because they are quite revealing of the development of ACPE and of the emphases during those periods of history, and I hope you will look at that document if you don't look at another one, and that you'll enter into dialogue with me about it. Because I think you can get at the history and the movement and the development of this association through those 4 mission statements. I've given you my perspectives on each of them. On page 27 of that document, I briefly summarize the emergence and contribution of some women in the development of CPE. And beginning on the same page, I tell of my involvement with the task force for the recruitment and development of racial ethnic minorities, of my intention to enhance their participation within the organization, structure, and the governance, and of my participation in the enhancement of supervisory CPE for persons of color. On page 28, I wrote about the concerted efforts of collaboration with other cognate groups and faith endorsing agencies in the hope of fostering mission and ministry in special settings for an inclusive group of seminarians and clergy. And my lands, have we become inclusive. There is here, for some of you, the recent piece of research I did in the fall that identifies that many different faith groups of students that were involved, and that many different seminarians that were involved in units of CPE in the Southeast in the fall. On page 30, I began my commentary on the present mission and vision statement under which we operate. I want you to give serious consideration to those. Now I'm going to get very personal with you. Somebody this morning wanted to know some of my story behind this, and I hope I have time to do more than just tell my story, but time is galloping, so y'all got to listen hurriedly. In writing all of these documents, I experienced the message of Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken. When Frost wrote that poem, he was looking back upon a time when he had made a choice between continuing on as a school teacher or trusting that he could write poetry. The less traveled road for Frost was the writing of poetry. When he wrote the last verse, The Road Not Taken, I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere, ages and ages since. Two roads diverged in a woods, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Frost had some notions about all the differences that particular road taken had made in his life. For Frost was writing that poem in retrospect. Life must be lived forward. It is only understood backwards, if it's understood at all. I'm looking backwards in retrospect, in the spirit of Harry Truman, who's a favorite president of mine, who among other things said, I'm going to bake my cookies, you can stand the heat in my kitchen or not. But he also said, and this is what I'm referring to here, it's what you learn after you know it all that makes all the difference. So, in the rest of the time allotted, I want to do three things. I want to tell my story to help you understand the kind of leader I aspire to be with you and why. Second, I want to give my assessment of how this region has been led over the last 20 years. And thirdly, I want to offer some consultation to future leaders of this region. First, I have always wanted to be a leader. As far back as I can remember, I wanted to be a leader. Neither of my parents nor grandparents were leaders. They were hardworking, well-respected, laborers, neighbors. They owned and operated a small retail grocery delivery charge account grocery store in the mill village of Hogansville, Georgia. They were good enough stewards, but they weren't leaders. You know the difference? There is on the printer of next to my computer these two sentences. Been there a long time. A good steward is one who plants trees knowing that neither she, he, nor any of her or his grandchildren will sit in the shade of them, nor eat the fruit of them, but plants them anyway. A good leader persuades the vision, equips and enables others to quicken the vision, has no investment in who gets the credit, and shares the responsibility of any failures. From my parents, I learned to accept folks as they are, to have a good sense of humor about myself and others, to operate as if the customer's perspective is accurate, to understand that the satisfied customer is your best advertisement, and to work with integrity, honesty, and accountability. They also taught me to care forthrightly for myself and for others. They served their customers well enough and endured enough goodwill to stay in business for a lifetime. You don't get a better legacy than that. But my forebears held no position of leadership, nor did they aspire to. But I wanted to be. My first act of leadership probably was my means of surviving or at least coping with 3 angry women. A sickly aunt who sucked on the sour lemon that life had delivered her until she was bitter all over. A controlling grandmother whose children just wouldn't do right. A depressed mother who lived in another woman's house. I learned to listen to them, to befriend their anger, so that it wouldn't turn into an ugly monster nor develop into an explosion. Among those women, I learned to trust my own anxiety, and with them, I first practiced the ministry of reconciliation and the art of compromise and negotiation. The first group to elect me to a position of leadership was the Boy Scout troop, number 48. I served every possible position within that local troop and in the West Georgia Council. The first position to which I was elected beyond Hogansville was that of the scribe for a troop of Boy Scouts representing the United States at the 7th World Jamboree in Bad Ischl, Austria in the summer of 1951. The scribe functioned as the secretary-treasurer and or the quartermaster, ensuring that the troop was fed, had sufficient supplies, and that the bills were paid. Now, as a 15-year-old, that's pretty good training for hosting a regional meeting. When I came back to Hogansville at age 15, I wanted to be president of every group with which I was identified and the captain of every team with which I competed. But being a leader in Hogansville High School was easy enough because no one else wanted either the work nor the responsibility. In college, my student work scholarship was in the registrar's office. My job was to create cards for the courses and structure the day of registration and then punch and key sort those cards by the next morning for the professors, and then at the end of the semester to figure out the grade point averages. And thereby I learned to value the contribution of the clerk toward the efficient and harmonious functioning of the institution. In seminary, I was the vice president of the student government, and I was chair of the committee that invited the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to address Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in the spring of 1961. It was my singular honor as a fellow Georgian to present Dr. King to that seminary community. I've never heard anyone quote more scripture and more philosophers in a 2-hour presentation than did he that day. But within those 2 hours of Dr. King's presentation to that seminary, the state Baptist conventions of Alabama and Mississippi withdrew all financial support to Southern Baptist Seminary, and the president and the faculty weren't too happy with that outcome. But they allowed me to graduate nevertheless. And therein, I learned that sometimes others suffer for a long time more from the consequences of your decision and your actions than you do, even if what you wanted to accomplish was commendable. After the suicidal death of my Uncle Jim, who was more like an older brother than an uncle, I enrolled in a summer unit of CPE in 1960 at Longview State Mental Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, under the supervision of Doug Turley. After completing the MDiv degree at Southern, I became pastor of the Ridgeland Heights Church in Sandersville, Georgia, and meanwhile Doug had come to Milledgeville, Georgia to be the director of the Central State Hospital chaplaincy program, and he invited me to do a residency of CPE under the joint supervision of himself, a Southern Baptist Association clinical pastoral educator, and of Henry Close from the Council for Clinical Training. A delayed grief reaction of my uncle's death put me in therapy, and Betty and I entered conjoint marital therapy with Reeve Chalmers, gained not only insight into our participation in the dynamics of both the Morgan and the Keith families, but learned ways to enrich 52 years of a grand partnership. And in our retirement, we got Betty also. And that's the best gift you've been given in a while. I was certified a CPE supervisor by the Southern Baptist Association of CPE Educators in 1965. Then, in the providence of God, when Doug Turley was called back to Georgia because of an emergency, I was elected as an alternate from the Southeast region to serve in the House of Delegates when the ACPE was formed in 1967. In 1968, this newly certified supervisor was elected to the office of secretary in this region, and therein I learned that the keeper of the record is the repository of the community's knowledge. My leadership with colleagues in the ACPE is adequately described in sections 3 and 5 of the document you've been given in registration. Very frankly and bluntly, I wanted the ACPE to be the standard-setting, the certifying, the accrediting agency for programs of clinical pastoral education in the United States. I wanted to create a new profession and a new society of educators of that profession on a par with every society of scholarship in this nation. In 1976, I stumbled upon a book by Robert Greenleaf that was entitled Servant Leadership. Robert Greenleaf was the organizational giant of AT&T, and this is what he wrote that's made all the difference in my life and work. By default, far too much of the inevitable leadership is in the hands of the gross, the self-seeking, and the corrupt. It is a losing battle for persons of goodwill to devote so much of their interest and energy in rescuing individuals from the hurt of their involvement in the system, when so many of these institutions are grinding them down faster than our most diligent saving efforts can rescue them. One may analyze, criticize, protest, beat upon the system, castigate the holders of power. But most of this is wasted breath. If there are not, somewhere within the structures of these discrete institutions, people with the will and the competence and the vision to lead them to better performance as servants of society. These harmful institutions can be circumscribed by law. They can be pressured into some kind of conformity by criticism from the outside. But they can be built into servant stature only by strong, ethical leadership operating inside. And then Greenleaf asks, who is preparing that next generation of servant leaders to do this good work? And confronted by that question, I went to Columbia Theological Seminary to prepare persons to become servant leaders within the pastoral office of particular congregations. 10 of those years I was professor of supervised ministry, 15 of those years professor of pastoral care and counseling. While serving on that faculty, I also served as interim pastor of 15 different congregations. That was my research. I wasn't one of the renowned scholars at Columbia, far from it. But my faculty colleagues elected me to serve on the faculty executive committee for 18 of the 25 years, chair of the pastoral area for 15 years, chair of the admissions committee for 15 years, chair of 3 faculty search committees and a member of 3 other search committees. During the last 10 years at Columbia, they honored me with the office of faculty marshal. And upon retirement, I was elected a professor emeritus. And all of those positions were more of an acknowledgement of my leadership than of my scholarship. In 1984, I became the 9th president of ACPE, and the most enjoyable experiences I had in those 40 years were the 2 years in which I moderated the General Assembly. I believed in that body. I trusted the outcomes of those deliberations. I work diligently to inform the representatives and to facilitate decisions by consensus. 2 major steps were taken during my presidency, about which I'm really still pleased. We purchased property at 1549 Claremont Road, and we established the ACPE Endowment Fund with a goal of $500,000. Now it's in excess of $1.5 million. When the gavel fell to conclude the 85 assembly in San Diego, Betty told me that during the hour she'd received an emergency call from my mother informing us that my father was dying of lung cancer. I came home to tend to his dying process, to attend to my mother's needs, and to become the best possible regional director that it was within me to become. By then, mid-1980s, I'd learned that if you are clear about your mission, comfortable with your identity, aren't too greedy nor power crazed, you have a better chance of keeping your grandiosity in check. Serving better your customers, delivering what you promise, and thereby you can earn enough goodwill and render enough good service to stay in business for a lifetime. I've also learned that every organism has to accommodate for stresses in order to survive. In the human organism, our motivations had best be both selfish and altruistic, caring for both self and others, both surviving ourselves and creating goodwill for ourselves. The tricky, slippery slope upon which many leaders destruct is greed, by both greed for more and lust for power. Collaboration and cooperation with others for the mutual benefit of all may be among the best ways of keeping greed and power in check, but you also need to remember that any method can also be a manipulative move for more greed and power. You don't get beyond being distorted, or in the Baptist language, being sinners. Reformed and ever-reforming leaders need to be held accountable by an informed body politic. The majority of people may not get it right every time, but they are more to be trusted over a span of history than any few who are in power, for power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely, and you can bet your life on it. Being clear about and accepting one's mission and one's identity are necessary if we are to live with one's integrity and by one's values for the better good of both the self and the others. And sometimes in the governance of ACPE in this region, we've done it good enough, and sometimes we have erred grossly. But in your life and mine, there is a road taken and a road not taken. If we don't take a particular road, if we think we can always be both and never either or, then as Doc Hammarskjöld told us, the logic of that means that you just stand at the crossroads all the time. But that's not what we do. We don't stand shivering on the bank. We must cross over, go through, get to the other side, connect with each other. Why? Because the river is there, always there, separated. So vulnerably you take on the crashing currents, the slippery rocks, and the deep holes. You plunge head first sometimes, you cautiously step in the shallow places at other times, but you got to get in and through the river. That's what faith, hope, and love work out to finally. So you make it across and find community. Or sometimes you just get wet. Yeah. And sometimes in the process you can catch a big rainbow and cook up a good meal for your friends. And that's when it's best of all. When the way was clear, I accepted the call to be the director of the Southeast region, and truth be told, I've enjoyed it more than I have words to express it. It's never been more fun than it is now. Since 1983, it's been a very good trip for me. Regrets? Too few to waste any energy over. Like the poet put it, I wish I had the time gone by. I'd use it differently than I've done. But then, it's likely that soon I'd find I'd made mistakes of another kind. Thanks for listening to some portions of my story. I hope you have a better understanding of how I came to be what I am with and for you. Now, hurriedly, let me talk a little bit about what's happened with us in the last 20 years. I'm proud of what we've done. I want to highlight some of the reasons why I'm proud. Firstly, speaking as your treasurer, we've done very well financially and we are fiscally sound. 1983, we had $17,000 deposited in 5 different CDs in 3 different institutions. I consulted with Sidney Anderson, the business administrator at Columbia Seminary, who was an expert in investment. And Sidney gave me this sound advice. Remember, this is not your money, so don't gamble with it. Invest it conservatively and don't be greedy. What matters in the market is the gain over the long haul. It was sound counsel. In the first 7 years, the $17,000 turned into $66,000. Then we had this wonderful idea in Baltimore that we would create an endowment fund. And not only with that, but we would invest our money in Calvert Social. Still is invested in Calvert Social. Kempton Haynes told us about that, a body who invests money in non-defense stuff. Well, in 1990, we set a goal of $150,000. At the end of 2006, 16 years later, the $66,000 had become $188,000. We're now in a position to use some of that income for special projects and missions. This next year, we'll use $15,000 of it. Some folks have been very responsible stewards. Not only have we invested wisely, we've contributed generously. No region has contributed more money to the operations of the ACPE than has the Southeast, either in money or in service. The 2nd, 9th, 15th, 16th, and 17th presidents of the ACPE were educated, certified, and or have served in this region. 2 of the 4 executive directors were educated and certified in this region. 13 persons who have served as regional directors were educated and certified here. Several years ago, we made a financial commitment to enhance supervisory CPE because we wanted to ensure another generation of qualified supervisors. We've spent $40,000 plus towards that special project. We have a dozen new CPE supervisors as a result. Additionally, and perhaps even more importantly, we've developed new programs of supervisory CPE and resourced some old supervisors to be better supervisors of supervisory CPE. We used to say the proof's in the pudding, and our candidates are being certified. But it's more than that. Our SITs are involved in the work of this region. At this meeting, we have in attendance 46 supervisors, 17 SITs, and that's 8 more SITs than retired supervisors, and that's a shift. I'm very pleased with the outcome of our commitment to do that some years ago. We've had good leadership in the Accreditation Commission and on the Commission. Since 1975, the chairperson of the Accreditation Commission has been a member of this region 15 of the 30 years. And the present one was educated and certified in this region. Under the leadership of Teresa and Phil, we've implemented a peer review process that exceeds any other region's process in its effectiveness. It's been emulated and copied by several regions, And today we're up to date with peer reviews, and no other region in the country can make that statement. We provided financial resources, at least $3,500 a year, and consistent leadership through the RIM International and to that network. We brought the housing of the archival material to Pitt's Library under the leadership of George Colgan and the secretarial work of Ann Titshaw. This region has more documents in that archive than any other region since the 1970s. I'm excited about what Ed and the History Committee are now doing with videotaping. It's a new form of recording our history. Last year we created a task force that I trust will become a standing committee tomorrow. I'm pleased with the direction we're headed in that 9-member Mission and Development Committee. That group may become our envisioning think tank and our management by objective body. And our administrative board will become our clerk. I want to say much more in appreciation of leadership, but time's a galloping and I want to talk to some future leaders. I will say this. In 23 years, I've never been in a meeting of the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education that I had any reason whatsoever to be embarrassed about you, and every reason to be proud of you. And I have been one proud papa. Or brother. A few months ago, when I was complaining in an email to Phil about my discomfort about retirement, I bemoaned the fact that I didn't know if I could make any difference in retirement. I always wanted to make a difference. Ever since Mrs. Crawford taught our sunbeams for Jesus that we were to let our light shine. But can one make a difference in retirement? Well, Phil, in his homespun wisdom, responded to my long email with a short, simple statement. Jap, just show up. Love, Phil. I concluded that Phil had captured the essence of life and ministry and whatever we might appreciate about leadership in those 3 words. Just show up. Of course, Phil meant more than simply arriving at some place where some group is gathering for some purpose. Nevertheless, simply to show up is to enter into the gathering of some system, to have intentions for that gathering system, to share perspectives about it, to entertain a vision for it, to participate within that gathering system, to render service to it, to help accomplish the mission of it, and devote one's energy for the purposes of that gathering system. So when future leaders of the Southeast region show up, I'd like to suggest, firstly, that they listen respectfully to the ideas and needs and aspirations and hopes of their constituents. I don't know that a non-anxious presence is a possibility, except in a book. But the leader had best be a lesser anxious presence who genuinely trusts the process and values the participants in that process. Leaders who show up and listen need also to ask the basic primary questions. And I may not have all of the answers, not by a long shot, but I do know the 5 primary questions. Whether you're going to the bedside, whether you're supervising a student, or whether you're trying to be a leader anywhere, the 5 primary questions are: why? Why me? Why me now? Why am I being called to attempt this foolishness? The why question. The why questions are questions of motivation, ability, time, energy, willingness, calling, authority. The second is the who question. Who are you? Who am I? Whom can we become together? Whose are we? Those who questions are questions of our uniqueness, our relatedness, our belongingness, our identity. I am who I am. Warts and all. Gifts and all. One of my first confrontations of a peer, jerky little preacher's kid that he was. Some of you might remember Elf Kilpatrick. Yeah. One day in the group, Eb looked at me and he said, "My problem all my life has been that I'm a preacher's kid. You know what your problem is?" I said, "Well, no, what?" He said, "You don't want to accept the fact that you're the son of a linthead." You know what a linthead is? Well, I am the son of a linthead. I grew up in a mill village. There were no classical books in my house. There was a Bible and a hymn book. I am who I am. But who I am meets who you are. And that's the second question. Third question is the where question. And the where question is, where is this happening? Where are we headed? It's a question of context, resources, support systems. Hurriedly, the fourth question, what? What is happening here? What do we know, feel, think, want? Questions of assessment and judgment and diagnosis and priorities. Very interesting that the regional director's position is called a position prospectus, not a job description. It hadn't been changed on paper in 20 years. But in that prospectus, every board that has come along has had an emphasis that they want the regional director to do. I almost got fired one time because I wasn't putting out the best newsletter in the nation. It was a priority for some people. Okay? This present board wants me to get out there with you and visit you. There is space in that prospectus for any of that to happen, and for change and all of that to occur. What's happening here and priorities. And lastly, how? How do we respond? How do we deliver what we promise? Questions of responsible, accountable, yet limited action within the resources available. We can't do everything. We can do some things exceedingly well. Leaders are also obligated to provide and maintain momentum toward possible and legitimate and agreed upon objectives. Or to say it another way, whatever else leadership entails, surely it is focused upon establishing the mission and vision of the body, setting priorities within the mission and vision, and achieving the objectives and ends within the means and the resources given to that entity. When the body politic becomes complacent, a good enough leader will stir the pot. In critical times, the leader might need to be very persuasive, but most times, providing information and resources will be enough for the body politic to make the decisions they need to make and to live with the consequences of their actions. That's trust in the process and the people who are in it. I've struggled with needing to be both efficient and effective. You know the difference. Efficiency is doing the thing right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. Servant leaders can delegate efficiency, but they must deal personally with effectiveness. And that entails assessing the capabilities of others, not overburdening them, but nudging and coaching so that they can actualize their own potentials. Well, leaders are also responsible for identifying and developing and mentoring and nurturing future leaders. Whatever legacy a leader might have to leave, that legacy needs to be given away freely and gratefully. Anyone can be a leader in some way, and everyone's potential for leadership is to be respected and needed, engaged and held accountable. And along the way, we will discover enough courage and hope and be given sufficient grace and much joy in our common labors of our shared mission. I'm grateful for the servant leadership of everybody that's listed in that first document. But I'm equally grateful for the leaders among you who mailed in or otherwise communicated your nomination to the rank committee this past February. I'd like for the four of you to please raise your hand. Well, some of them are not here. If you want to talk about leadership in this region, that's where it starts. You have a vision, you have somebody in mind, and you take the initiative of recommending that somebody to be elected. And it happens every year at the same time. And the nominating ballot comes out on the email and in the newsletter. And that's where leadership in this region starts. And your nomination is just as important in the future of this region as the next person that is elected or employed. And if you don't believe that, please let me convince you of it. And please get on board with the nominating process. Beyond that, your presence and your voice and your vote is your leadership at every meeting. Well, I've tried to be a good enough servant leader. Sometimes others have followed where I wanted to lead. Many times others have resisted where I wanted to lead. And some future time, some others will judge who the good enough servant leader was among us. We can look back and say, Obert, Gus, Doug, others. Imogene. I think I've been a good enough servant, perhaps a good enough stated clerk in the tradition of us Presbyterians. But that's also too soon for anyone to pass judgment upon that. Someday, out yonder, when we say goodbye, may it be that we mostly say, thank you. May it be enough that we made a difference for and with one another. And we end up being grateful for each other. And rather than the last words being goodbye, may they simply be, thank you. Thank you. being served in the Buccaneer Room. If you're registered for this conference, you're invited to come.